So if you're here for the title of the video, you are gonna enjoy these facts.
What do you say to the people that literally 100% disagree with you and they say there is racism today? It is a challenging time today. What do you say to them?
I say, look at the evidence. Look at the evidence. You know, a lot of people are like the farmer that came to the creek where it was like coming, it was 3 feet high and moving at about 20 miles an hour, and he forced the mule in and they were swept down the creek. A year later, he comes to the same crossing. This time it's only 6 inches. The mule refuses to go in because the mule had good memory but poor judgment.
Gotcha.
Conditions were not like they were back in segregation when I was locked up twice in Mississippi. The conditions have changed, but many of us have. But again, look at the evidence.
Yes, certain people are the slave of their own mind. They can't get away.
When whites were at their worst, we were at our best. As I said, in 1930 to 1940, when segregation and racism was enshrined in law, blacks had the highest marriage rate of any group in society. Elderly people could walk safely in those communities without fear of being assaulted by their grandchildren.
I am from those times. I remember people were telling me, look at the whites. They're never together. They're all getting divorced. We work as a team. Don't be like them. And suddenly...
So let's look at the evidence. When we refused access to hotels, we built our own hotel, financed by our own means. The Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carver and Calvert Hotel in Florida, the St. Charles in Chicago, the St. Teresa in New York. I could go on and on. When we were denied access to colleges, we built our own. And in fact, our small business formation rate was higher than whites in the 20s, and that really determines any group's participation in the economy. It is not what government does for you or what white people do. In fact, I think those who continue to push this race agenda are Eurocentric. They assume that the destiny of blacks is determined by what white people do. That has never been the case.
Doesn't that sound a little disgusting that the only way you feel empowered if you're helped by white people? Right?
To push this race agenda are Eurocentric. They assume that the destiny of blacks is determined by what white people do. That has never been the case. We closed the education gap in the South between 1920 and 1940. How do we do it? Julius Rosenwald, the CEO of Sears, came together with Booker T. Washington, and he put up $4 million. The black community matched it with $4.8 million. We built 5,000 schools to teach ex-slaves how to read and write. And as a consequence of that study, in between 1920 and 1940, the education gap in the South between whites and blacks was 3 years. 8th grade for whites, 5th grade for blacks. Mm-hmm. Within 20 years, that gap closed within 6 months. There were 5 high schools at the turn of the century in New York, Baltimore, Washington, Atlanta, and New Orleans. They had used textbooks, overcrowded classrooms, half the budgets of white schools. But every one of those schools out-tested every white school in those cities.
Y'all killing me with this. Hashtag, if people don't help you, you kind of work harder for your family and for your kids, and your kids copy that without trying to depend consistently on a government that if the white people don't help me, I'll be a failure.
If we were able to close the education gap between 1920 and 1940 through self-determination and hard work, if we were able to out-test white schools in those cities, then the question is, in those same schools today in Baltimore, for instance, where they're run by blacks, not a single student could read at grade level or perform at grade level.
Because we all know who is at fault. It's not the black teachers, it's the white people.
And so how can you say that it is racism that is the cause of the present day challenges when under segregation we achieved? One other example we gave from our studies. In 1943, blacks were prohibited from being naval officers. Eleanor Roosevelt persuaded her husband to train them. So they selected 16 black college-educated men for training, the Naval Academy, not the Academy, Naval Training Center. The Navy says, aha, we're going to give these black cadets in 8 weeks what we give white cadets in 16, so they wash out. When these brothers found out what the deal was, they covered the windows in their barrack and stayed up all night and studied. And when they were tested, they scored in the 90th percentile.
Wow.
So then they said, well, they cheated. So they tested them individually. They scored in the 93rd percentile. 13 of them eventually,
Unbelievable.
13 of them eventually became naval officers. They call them the Golden 13. You
Can you
look
Google
it up.
this?
That test, the test scores today has never been bettered.
So in other words, black people found out they were helping the white people more, so they decided to study more, and they won. And they rechecked and they won again. Maybe when people push against you, it might make you a little stronger to prove them wrong, right? Isn't that a good thing? No! Let's point the finger. And when they fail because they're not motivated, keep pointing the finger.
What?
The test scores today has never been bettered. So again, I respond to people with evidence. The incarceration rates of blacks from the turn of the century up to the 60s was under 25%.
Incarceration was under 25%.
Under 25%.
Where are we at
it
today?
It shot up to I think it was like 90,000 blacks were in jail in 1960. That went up to 900,000 over the next 30 years.
And we all know why. Single mother, lack of father, feminism, welfare.
Why do you think that is? What happened? What changed?
In our studies, red, white, and black, we looked at the experiences. We looked at 6 major plantations to find out what the state of marriage was of slaves. 75% of those slaves had a man and woman raising children. Nuclear family continued of marriage was of slaves. 75% of those slaves had a man and woman raising children. The nuclear family continued to prosper in the face of segregation for 100 years, but all of that changed in the 60s with the poverty program.
Lyndon Johnson?
Yes.
Hashtag welfare.
Johnson came in, and what happened was the social scientists who were pushing socialism on America, Cloud and Piven at Columbia, said if you disconnect work from income, then school dropout rates will increase, drug addiction, all of those things. So what the government did was offer welfare as an alternative to a man in the house. We relaxed the rules. We separated work from income, and as a consequence, that was supported by the Black Power movement. Also, the women's movement was anti-man. And so you have a combination of social policy, but policy alone wouldn't have done it. The federal government enticed welfare, to blacks to go on welfare. Welfare used to be stigmatized in the black community.
I still remember that. I was on Curacao on my island. We looked down on people that got welfare from the government. They were losers because most people that were getting welfare, they had drug issue, at least in my experience. But now it's a normalized thing, just like the word baby mama.
But the federal government began to interpret it as reparations and as entitlements. They withdrew any requirement that you should tell the paternity of the father, paternity in cases of pregnancy.
Yeah, just write the name for the person that you think is the father, and if he doesn't complain about it, he will be the father.
Is that an opinion or is that a fact?
So that more blacks came into the welfare system in the first 5 years of the 70s. And millions flooded into the system at a time when the unemployment rate was under 4%. So it is a combination of social policies plus the civil rights movement morphed into a race grievance industry. And many of those civil rights leaders became mayors and elected to public office, where we spent $22 trillion during that period on programs to aid the poor.
Imagine being a person pushing black power. Finally, the government is going to give us money. The ladies be like, hey, I don't need you anymore. Government, that's my baby daddy.
Where 70 cents of every dollar went not to the poor, but those who served the poor.
That is what I've been telling so many people. The amount of money they receive is to maintain the infrastructure and give them a job, a salary that the poor people would never have. But you will keep giving them just a little to give them the illusion that somebody is helping them to keep them there. By that knowledge, I prefer to suffer that I'm motivated to work even harder. But hey, now we have the word human right. You don't have to work that hard to have a future. Nice. That is the mentality that you're feeding to your kid. No wonder they cannot do something by themselves.
What percentage of it?
70%.
70% of the 22 trillion went to the people that serve the poor.
They ask which problems are fundable, not which problems are solvable. So in other words, a friend of mine described it this way. He's having a cabin built in Wisconsin. His electrician is a drunk and the carpenter has one leg. Their value to him is their skill. But if he was a disabilities director, their value to him would only be the disability.
That is a freaking great analogy, and I'm going to use it a lot.
So we have a situation where we have really created a commodity out of poverty.
Only 4% of kids that were born in America are to a single mother. That increased from 4% to 40%.
Right.
Okay. And where it's at today, specifically
70%.
in 70% in blacks and different in, different communities. So one, why did it happen? How did we get here? Two, how would you fix it?
Well, first of all, we got here because we had the social policy that incentivized single parents. In other words, I had a young couple. She said that my husband's a janitor and I'm a secretary, and he lost his job. She said, I applied for welfare as a married couple and they refused me. But she said, if I was a single mother, then I can get help. And so you really provide a disincentive for marriage, and you wonder why you get it. You get more of what you reward and less of what you punish. And so over those decades, the more you work, the more perverse incentives for you. If I work and get a raise, I'm going to lose child care. So that's why we have a system that disincentivizes work and marriage.
Look, I'm a person that almost never sick. I don't smoke, I don't drink, and even if I did, I didn't do it a lot. So most of the years, I was ready to work compared to a lot of people that I know that if they didn't, they were healthy, and when they do then, every once in a while they're sick and they have to stay home. And I'm like, wait a second, why don't you stop partying? Well, it is my human right. I'm like, okay, what is my human right that I always have to do your job when you're sick because I'm always healthy? Nobody cares about that. Oh, well, you have good genes. No, I don't have good genes. I treat myself better. It's like certain people are so irresponsible. Cool, live your life. Then people should be able to fire you because your lifestyle makes you inconsistent. That is how I think. Because it's unfair that the people that are never sick and they try to maintain that by eating healthy are getting punished. The best way you can help everybody is let everybody live by the same rule if they're sick or not.
That's racist.
And I know it's a harsh rule, but then at least the person that is working hard feels I'm getting good points for working hard, not getting good points for being sick. Unless it's a real sickness that you can't control, hey, eat freaking healthy. But the idea there is an incentive that my wife would be like, if I was single, I would get more money. My wife was like, no, I want this vibe, this teamwork, because we want to give our kids something even better. Look, man, it's about a teamwork advantage. And if you see that as a sacrifice that you don't want to have, then don't make the kid. Because now, the sacrifice that you made, the kid thinks is normal. And then you're surprised that the incarceration rate goes up. Because you made it normal that they can do whatever they want, the government will help. Especially when the government helps to lock them up in prison. I know, man. The fact that I have one eye that works, not this one is plastic. I don't want to be right. I don't want to escape the hard work. I just want the best for my child. And if you really wanted that for your child instead of pointing finger, you don't need the two working eyes to understand what I'm pointing at. That is the freaking problem. It's the fact that you only see the positive momentary effect, but you don't understand the long-term effect. And you're like, we'll deal with that tomorrow. Yes.
What the f*** you doing here, nigga? Identify yourself. Who the f***
My son has autism. My wife had a thrombosis in her hand. She almost died. Her father has cancer in her neck. I have one eye. My mom died when I was 6 years old. I haven't seen any of my family almost more than 20 years. I lived more than 11 hours in the plane away from my family. And guess what? It gives me purpose. Because I'm not distracted by my own family and I'm just focusing on my child, giving him something I never had in my life. Somebody that actually invests cash and talks to them like a person, not a TikTok. And let me know in the comment section what you really think about this.